At the time this story begins, my wife, who was 32 then, had a friend she met back in college. Over the years, this friend had become her best friend. They were inseparable during their college days, partying like wild women and indulging in behaviors that, looking back, were almost reckless. In fact, it's surprising that my wife didn't drop out of college with the amount of time they spent going out. I met my wife when she was 35 on her first day at work. I had already been at the company for several years, and it was my responsibility to introduce her to the office, help her get acquainted with the team, and ease her into her new role. Over time, we became close, and eventually, our relationship turned into something deeper. Before long, we got married, and that's where the real story begins. After 6 years of marriage, my wife's old friend from college, the one who had been a part of all her wild experiences, finally got engaged. This surprised my wife, who had never imagined her friend would be the type to settle down, given how much she enjoyed her single life. My wife even joked about how her friend probably only invited her to the wedding because she wanted more time to live it up as a single lady before getting married. As a couple, we had agreed early on that it wasn't healthy for her to remain close to this friend. Their relationship had brought out a side of my wife that wasn't conducive to our marriage. I had noticed that this friend tended to bring chaos into my wife's life, encouraging behaviors that were better left in the past. It wasn't about controlling her friendships. It was about protecting what we had built together. Not long after my wife found out about her friend's engagement, she told me one evening that she was going to visit her parents and would be staying with them until after dinner. This wasn't unusual. My wife was close to her family, so I didn't think twice about it. I told her that was fine and went about my day as usual. But later that evening, when I got home from work and took out the trash, I noticed something strange. A postcard was sticking out of the side of the garbage bag, just barely visible through the plastic. I'm not sure what compelled me to take a closer look, but curiosity got the better of me. I pulled the postcard out and read it. To my shock, it was an invitation to a bachelorette party. Not just any bachelorette party, but one happening that very night. And the venue was a men's strip club in the city. I could feel my heart pounding as I tried to process what I had just found. My wife hadn't mentioned anything about this party, and I knew instantly that something wasn't right. Without hesitation, I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the city. I couldn't stand the thought of my wife being in a place like that, especially surrounded by our old party crowd, who had a history of encouraging each other to make reckless decisions. The entire drive there, I was filled with a mixture of fear, anger, and anxiety, wondering what I might find when I arrived. When I got to the club, I walked inside and immediately started asking the women there if they had seen my wife or the bride-to-be. I was determined to find her and get to the bottom of whatever was going on. After asking around for what felt like hours, I finally found a woman who recognized the names I was asking for. She told me that my wife and the bride had left the club a short while ago with 2 men. I could hardly believe what I was hearing, and when I pressed her for more details, she hesitated, clearly unsure of whether she should tell me anything. But after I pleaded with her and even offered her money, she finally gave in and told me the name of the hotel they had gone to. My mind was racing. I couldn't believe that my wife would put herself in such a situation. As I drove to the hotel, I started calling her phone repeatedly, but she didn't pick up. I felt a sinking feeling in my chest as the reality of the situation began to set in. When I arrived at the hotel, I rushed to the front desk and asked for the room number of my wife and her group, but the receptionist wouldn't give me any information. I was stuck, helpless, with no choice but to wait. I stood in the lobby, pacing back and forth, my mind filled with dread. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I saw her. My wife stepped off the elevator with another man beside her. They were laughing, seemingly pleased with themselves, until she looked up and saw me standing there. Her face went pale. She gasped, covering her mouth in shock, and tears immediately began to flow down her cheeks. It was like everything came crashing down at once. The man standing next to her, oblivious until that moment, quickly realized the situation he was in when she told him I was her husband. He looked uncomfortable, like he wanted nothing more than to disappear. It wasn't his problem, but he clearly didn't want to be caught in the middle of whatever was unfolding in front of him. I confronted my wife, demanding to know what had just happened, but she froze, completely unable to speak. After what felt like an eternity, she finally mumbled something about making a terrible mistake and wanting to go home to talk about it. I wasn't satisfied with her answer. I asked her again what had happened between her and the man she had been with. She opened her mouth to explain, but then stopped, unable to form the words. Instead, she reached for my hand, trying to lead me out of the hotel, as if that would make everything better. I pulled my hand away, refusing to leave until I had the truth. I told her that if she had cheated on me, there was no way I was taking her back home. At that moment, it was like she completely broke down. She couldn't function. She collapsed onto the floor of the lobby, sobbing uncontrollably. A few minutes later, her friend, the bride-to-be, came down the elevator, and when she saw the scene unfolding, she looked horrified. Eventually, the truth came out. My wife had lied to her friend as well, telling her that we had been separated for months. I was stunned. Later, we sat in my car outside the hotel. My wife finally confessed everything. She told me that after years of being married, she had started to feel bored. She craved excitement, something to break the monotony of our life together. She admitted that she had wanted a spark, something to reignite the passion she felt she had lost. That's why she had gone to the party, why she had lied to me, and why she had let herself get caught up in the chaos of the night. She said that the fun she was having with her friend was something she knew I wouldn't approve of because it wasn't moral or respectful of the vows we had taken together. But she did it anyway. I was furious. I told her that I understood now. She was bored with our relationship, so she had cheated on me. I couldn't forgive her for what she had done, and I told her as much. I made it clear that I didn't want to be married to her anymore. She started wailing, begging me to reconsider. But I was done. I asked her to get out of the car, and after asking her multiple times, she finally did. I drove away, leaving her behind, devastated and alone. In the days that followed, her brother came to collect her belongings. She moved in with him, but after about a month, he grew tired of having her around. She was miserable, unable to work or find any joy in life. She called me constantly, asking to come over or just talk, but I refused. I couldn't risk being manipulated into taking her back. I had to protect myself from the pain she had caused. After a while, I stopped answering her calls altogether. It's been 2 years since that night, and she's still living with her brother. Their relationship has deteriorated, and she's grown bitter. She's angry that I never forgave her for what she calls one night of fun. She's even taken to social media, preaching about how wrong partying and drinking are, as if trying to convince herself that she's learned her lesson. But I know better. What she did to me was unforgivable, and I will never allow myself to be taken advantage of like that again. This experience taught me something valuable. I can't control what my spouse does. I can only control my response. Despite the years we spent together, I realized that I deserve better. And I believe I can find love again with someone who truly respects me and the life we build together. After a few days of tension between us, she began to act a bit friendlier towards me again. I noticed that over the next 3 weeks, she started meeting with her sister, Madison, without informing me while I was at work. The first time she did this, I was working late and didn't find out until later. I checked the security alarm system, which kept a time-stamped record of our comings and goings, and saw she had left the house while I was still away. As the days passed, she went out 2 more times to meet Madison, which caused me to grow increasingly concerned. I decided to confront her about it, asking her what was going on. She explained that she was meeting with Madison because she was starting to have second thoughts about trusting her fiancé AP. This response baffled me. When I met them, they seemed so happy and confident together. It didn't align with her sudden doubts. Feeling uneasy, I started to look at Madison's Facebook profile, while my wife was supposedly meeting with her. I was shocked to find that Madison appeared perfectly fine, posting cheerful updates about her wedding planning and sharing pictures with AP. This made me even more suspicious. So I decided to message Madison directly, asking if she was with my wife at that moment. Her reply was no, and she seemed taken aback by my question. My heart sank. I explained that my wife had told me she was meeting with Madison multiple times that week. Madison began to worry after I mentioned my wife's concerns about AP going to the gym more often than usual. She suggested calling AP to see if he would answer, but he didn't pick up. We couldn't track either of their locations on the app we used. My wife then went to the gym, but AP wasn't there either. We were left with no clear answers, so we decided to wait for them to return home. The situation took a dramatic turn when Madison texted me, revealing that AP arrived at her house just as my wife was pulling into our driveway. My anxiety spiked as I realized the timing was too coincidental. When my wife walked in, I felt a surge of panic and adrenaline. I tried to maintain my composure, but my voice cracked as I confronted her, insisting I knew she hadn't been with Madison and that AP was missing. To my shock, she accused me of harboring feelings for Madison since I had reached out to her. Before I could defend myself, she abruptly declared she wanted a divorce, saying I could have her sister now. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, leaving me utterly stunned. I quickly asserted that I didn't have any romantic interest in Madison. I had only contacted her to find out the truth about my wife. Desperate for answers, I demanded to know where she had been and why she suddenly wanted a divorce. She responded by saying that AP had come to realize how amazing Madison was compared to her own sister, who she claimed feared commitment. I looked her straight in the eye and told her she was being cruel for even contemplating taking her sister's fiancé when they appeared so happy together. In a fit of anger, I lashed out and insulted her, and she responded by slapping me before storming out of the house with luggage she had packed in advance. It was as if she genuinely believed she was destined to be with AP, and leaving me behind would somehow solidify that future. In a state of panic, I called Madison, who answered despite being in the middle of an emotional confrontation with AP. I could hear him crying and apologizing to her, and when she finally managed to break away from him, she explained what had transpired. Madison revealed that my wife had manipulated AP into meeting her multiple times, claiming she wanted to know her sister's fiancé better. They had kept it a secret from both Madison and me to avoid any overreactions, which turned out to be a colossal mistake. In a twisted justification, my wife had convinced AP to engage in an affair with her as a way to prove he was worthy of loving Madison. I was horrified and could hardly believe what I was hearing. The situation was so messed up that all I could do was apologize to Madison for what my wife had done, ruining her plans to marry the man she loved. AP, realizing the gravity of his actions, begged Madison for forgiveness. She was in tears on the phone with me, and I asked her how we should proceed from here. Without hesitation, she told me she was breaking up with AP. I responded that I would be divorcing my wife since neither of us deserved such betrayal. In the wake of all this turmoil, Madison and I decided to form a sort of survival pact, vowing to support each other through the emotional fallout and emerge wiser from the experience. A year later, we started seeing each other regularly, and our relationship slowly evolved into a romantic connection. Meanwhile, AP moved away as soon as he realized that he wouldn't be forgiven by Madison. He didn't even consider moving in with my wife because he saw her only as a mistake. Once my wife realized how AP truly felt about her, she began bombarding me with calls, begging for a chance to talk over coffee or even a sleepover. I declined every invitation, only answering her calls when absolutely necessary. In a desperate attempt to get my attention, she resorted to camping out in our yard, which prompted me to seek a restraining order against her. After the divorce was finalized, she continued to camp outside my house, even when Madison came over to visit. I was prepared to call the police if my ex tried to enter the house, but thankfully, she recognized the restraining order meant she could not trespass. After that, I didn't hear from her for some time, but eventually, I learned that her father had to bail her out of jail for some foolish incident. It became evident that she had developed an unhealthy obsession with her sister's life, which only ruined her own happiness and confirmed her deepest fears. That Madison was a better woman than she was. My wife's inability to find contentment and her unwillingness to support anyone but herself had ultimately destroyed her chances for meaningful relationships. In the end, I felt completely justified in refusing to give my wife another chance after her appalling behavior. My experience serves as a cautionary tale for others facing similar betrayals, underscoring the importance of loyalty and honesty in any relationship. What are your thoughts on this situation? Thank you for joining us in our stories where revenge is served hot. If you enjoyed this narrative, please consider subscribing to our channel to ensure your next chef remains loyal. Stay tuned for the next episode to satisfy your appetite for revenge. And a word of caution. If you're under 18, be prepared. It's not for the faint-hearted.